Hello, my name is James Spiro, and this is CTech's BiblioTech video series. I'm very excited now to be joined by Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, the author of I, Human. Tomas is an organizational psychologist who works mostly in the areas of personality profiling, people analytics, talent identification, the interface between human and artificial intelligence, and leadership development. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at ManpowerGroup, a Professor of Business Psychology at University College London and Columbia University, co-founder of deepersignals.com, and an associate at Harvard's Entrepreneurial Finance Lab. He's the writer behind books such as Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders?, The Future of Recruitment, Using the New Science of Talent Analytics to Get Your Hiring Right, and this year's I, Human, AI, Automation, and the Quest to Reclaim What Makes Us Unique. Thomas, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, James.
Thomas, in your book, you tackle one of the biggest questions facing our species, which is, will we use AI to improve the way we work and live, or will we allow it to alienate us? So what I want to do is ask you, please, why today? Why did you find that today was the moment that this question needed to be asked, and why did your book come out when it did?
Yeah. So, you mentioned my two previous books, and actually this is almost like the third part of that trilogy, because the conclusion to why so many incompetent men become leaders and how to fix it is that the fixing it part is about relying on data, not our intuition, but looking for hard facts that enables us to, distinguish between confidence and competence, substance versus style. And I did see when I wrote this 4 or 5 years ago that AI could be a really powerful tool to basically translate data into insights that make leadership selection more data-driven. Then came the future of recruitment, which was about, practical advice on how organizations can do that. And then, I was already contracted to do a new book with Harvard Business Review Press during the pandemic. And, on a personal level, I found myself interacting with AI so much, and much like everybody else, interacting with other humans so little, that I thought, okay, this thing is really about to take off, especially if we're going to be in lockdown for a while. So I started to look at the wider impact of artificial intelligence on human behavior. Coincidentally, the book was due to launch when OpenAI released ChatGPT, which I always say is good and bad. I mean, it's good because there's a lot of interest now on a book that explores the implications for human intellect and human creativity in an age where we can outsource much of our thinking to machines. And it's bad because I had to write it myself. I couldn't rely on ChatGPT to write it. I think the next one will probably be written by AI, and I'll just edit it, much like probably you are doing and other people in this field.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely get to that in a sec about kind of the precipice of where you seem to be when you seem to be writing it. I'd like to highlight some of the things that you address in the start of the book, which is what some of the tech leaders of today have said about AI. So you comment that Bill Gates has confessed that he's concerned about superintelligence. You say that, or you highlight that the late Stephen Hawking noted that, quote, a super intelligent AI will be extremely good at accomplishing its goals, and if those goals aren't aligned with ours, we're in trouble. And then finally, Elon Musk, the kind of the man of the hour for the last year or so, he labeled AI a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization, although you highlight it hasn't stopped him from trying to implant it into our brains. Thomas, what are we doing? Why are we pursuing such a scary and unknown technology?
So I think we're pursuing it mostly for two reasons. Number one is over the past 10 years, we've amassed so much data that no human intellect, or we just don't have enough human resources or human intelligence available to analyze that data. So we had to actually rely on a large language model or some version of artificial intelligence rather than human intelligence to help us make sense of the data and actually help us make decisions in a more efficient, quick, and effortless way, which is needed in a world that is so complex. That takes me to the second reason, which is that fundamentally human beings are very lazy. You know, we love to optimize everything for familiarity, for predictability. I mean, let me give you a very simple example, James, which is that you could either sit down to watch whatever movie Netflix recommends you, and then after 5 seconds, you'll be watching a movie alone or with your friends, partner, family, etc. Or you could do what I often do, which is dismiss the algorithm and look deeper and start to search, etc. And then I will waste 2 hours of my life. Actually, by the time I find the movie that I want to watch, I probably go to sleep. Yeah. So we're trading off efficiency, which basically means lazy, fast, and furious decision making for deep, thoughtful, and kind of expert-like decisions. And it's the same whether we're choosing a job, a romantic partner, a restaurant, a hotel, or what we consume in terms of news. So, this is why AI has been basically introduced as a very, as a potential tool that can enhance productivity, even if we're not necessarily going to invest whatever savings we gain from the productivity that AI introduces into more thoughtful, creative, and intellectually fulfilling activities. Therein lies the problem.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned the social dilemma, or you mentioned Netflix algorithms, and I want to touch on the social dilemma and
Yeah.
some of the ways that we're seeing that manifest. I know that my wife and I could definitely benefit from an algorithm stopping us from arguing every night about what to watch.
Yes,
I want to talk about more of the nefarious things that you mentioned, and maybe some of the ways
Mhm.
that AI is affecting us in ways we don't maybe understand. So we speak about how much choice we have in the world. How much choice do we have, and how much is it just an illusion of choice? I mean, I think I'm choosing a movie to watch, but perhaps Netflix knew weeks ago that it was going to put it right in front of me.
So, look, I mean, on a philosophical or epistemological level, if you look at most of the mainstream science in neuroscience and behavioral science, there's probably about 80% consensus that actually free will is overrated or overstated. That is mostly an illusion. We think that we're in control of the decisions that we make, but actually, there's so many serendipitous and biologically driven causes of our decision, right? So, I mean, and there's a lot of experiments on this. So, whether you're hungry or not determines your preference for a potential romantic partner, for example. Whether you're tired or not determines whether you are happy to meet a stranger or afraid of meeting a stranger. Having said that, I think leaving aside these philosophical or metaphysical discussions, which are hard to verify and often don't mean much to the average consumer, what is clear to me and what I highlight in the book is that if we get to a point where our decisions are so predictable that AI can make most of these decisions, even if we're not automated and replaced by AI, surely we need to question our sense of subjective free will. If when I'm writing an email to you, Google's autocomplete version is correct 90 or 95% of the times, then I have to wonder whether I really am an agentic, creative human that still has some choice as to what we can do and what we shouldn't do, or whether it's more deterministic than we think. And I think here, the way to think about these issues is that we are mostly free to choose, or at least we feel that we are free to choose, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to pause, think, and choose. Because one of the things that the digital age has introduced is ever more and more attention deficit disorder like behaviors, right? We are pressed to do things quicker and quicker, and therefore there are fewer rewards for pausing and thinking, which explains the rise of things like mindfulness movement or the mindfulness app and people that go into kind of digital detox, etc. So we're perfectly capable of pausing and thinking, but most of the decisions that we're making in the AI age are so fast that they become very predictable, and therefore they can be outsourced to machines.
Okay, that's a wonderful point. And I remember that when Google first started doing that in my emails and predicting what I would say, I remember getting really freaked out, thinking, "Oh my God, it's writing my own emails." And I thought, well, actually, if it works for me, then so people are becoming more accustomed and more used to it. I'd like to touch on, maybe we can elaborate something on what you mentioned in the book, which is what you call a crisis of distractibility. So I
Mhm.
love that term, and
Yeah.
I think it really sums up where so many of us are at the moment today online. What did you mean by a crisis of distractibility, and how is it manifesting itself in recent years?
Yeah, so look, I remember about 10 or 11 years ago going to a conference where it was digital marketing conference where you had all of the big tech firms. And for the first time, people were introducing this notion of the second screen, which was very, counterintuitive and, kind of bold at the time. Wow, people are watching TV and they're holding their iPads or they're looking at their smartphones and there's a second screen market, right? Now, of course, we all have 3 or 4 screens that we're interacting with all the time. And, in fact, I mean, life itself has been downgraded to a distraction. You're almost distracted when you can't pay attention to your apps and your social media feed and what's going on. You get a bit of FOMO if you can't, interact with people digitally and you have to pay attention to the analog world. Productivity wise, I think this is really important because even though we keep on arguing about whether technology is going to make us now, generative AI is going to lead to a massive productivity gain or the demise of human civilization, with big tech firms saying it's going to make us fitter, healthier, happier, more productive, like the Radiohead song. And then everybody else thinking, oh my God, this is it. Actually, the productivity data is very, very clear. Productivity defined as doing more with less went up between 2000 and 2008 in the first wave of the digital revolution, only to stagnate or stall after that with the advent of social media. So 60 to 75% of smartphone use occurs during working hours, whether you're working from home or in an office. 70% of workers report to being distracted. Um, in the US alone, distractions in the form of digital distractions cost the US economy 650 billion US dollars in productivity loss each year, which is 15 times more than the cost of absenteeism, turnover, and sickness. And multitasking, which we all, here's an interesting stat for you, multitasking, which we all do, results in a deficit to our intellectual or cognitive performance of about 10 IQ points. It's basically as debilitating as smoking weed and presumably minus the benefits, right? So I think, we think and fool ourselves into thinking that we can multitask, but every time you switch from one task to the other and you go back, you lost the equivalent of 26 minutes of concentration on that task. So, technology might improve productivity, but sometimes you become more productive if you ignore or have the ability to resist technology as well.
That's such an interesting point, and one of the things that I know, at least in my work as a writer, is that the process of flow and deep work for me is so invaluable, and that sometimes I even put my phone in the other room. I cut off my internet when I'm working. I just need to be without distractions. I thought I was just being uptight, but I suppose that there's the data in it to support it. Now I'm on the older side of a millennial. Now there are millennials that are a bit younger than me, but there's also now this whole new generation of Gen Z. They're going to be growing up in the world that you've been outlining of AI and a search for uniqueness in a world where everything's being personalized. What are some of the challenges that they're going to have that someone like me and someone like you didn't have when they were trying to find their voice or trying to establish their own careers or relationships?
So look, I think the main one is really a challenge to demonstrate social proof. If you're just entering or starting your career, no matter how smart you are, it's a very steep curve to demonstrate to others that you can provide more value than they can get from AI, right? So let's use you as an example. I mean, you're probably paying a lot of attention to ChatGPT and other forms of generative AI in terms of their ability to produce an article, a research piece, an opinion piece, and compare what you can do in relation to that. And you're probably, in your area of expertise, able to spot the errors. Maybe you use it as a first pass kind of draft, but then you're like, okay, thank God I can add something to it. But really, the reason that you are adding value to that is because other people perceive, because of your track record, your reputation, and your expertise, your experience, that actually you know your stuff. If you're just starting, it's very, very difficult to persuade people that you actually have that expertise. And actually, Gen Z and the next generation will probably need to showcase their expertise in a different area or in a different way. I think expertise basically is mutating from knowing a lot of answers to asking the right questions, from memorizing and retrieving facts to knowing how and why and where the facts are wrong. And fundamentally, knowing how to make decisions on the basis of information that might be noisy, it might be correct, it might be incorrect, it might be a hallucination, which is, the polite euphemism for bullshitting, which AI can do very well. So I think, demonstrating and cultivating expertise is the big, big challenge for the younger generations.
That's very interesting. And I did read something earlier this week that said that the future artists or the future engineers, they're not going to be coders, they're going to be prompt engineers. And it's what you said about asking the right questions. They're going to know how to get the best out of the AI. That at the moment, folks like me and you, or hopefully less you, more me, we're kind of walking around with our blindfolds, not really understanding what it's capable of.
Yeah. And even that, because there's a sensible and rational argument to be made that as soon as there's enough smart prompt engineers prompting AI will learn to prompt itself. And then we have to move to the next thing and the next iteration, right? So I think, look, there's going to be a very intense cat and mouse race or game where as soon as we develop something, it can be automated, and then we have to develop something else, and then it can be automated, et cetera, et cetera. So actually, creativity, which you alluded to, is really, really critical. Look, I give you another simple example. Spotify probably has enough data to automate 80% of its artists because it has an algorithm to understand what people like, and most of that music can be pre-processed, prefabricated, and done synthetically. Even if it automated 100% of its content, it wouldn't probably kill musicians. It would push artists to invent the next version of music. And I think that's how we need to think about every form of performance that is intellectually fueled or creatively or artistically informed.
Okay, thank you. That brings me to my next great point that I wanted to highlight, something that you wrote in the piece, which is our basically our fear of technology as it's been coming throughout the ages. So I'm going to quote a paragraph that you wrote. Pardon me, it's a bit long, but it's really worth it. You say, quote, humans have a strong track record of blaming their technological inventions for their own cultural demise and degeneration. Since the dawn of television, critics have repeatedly blamed TV for being, you quote, the opium of the people, inhibiting human imagination and intellectual development and fueling violence and aggression. You then go on to say, when the first newspapers began to circulate in the 16th century, skeptics feared it would kill social gatherings. Why bother meeting if there was no news or gossip to exchange? Finally, you say, long before that, Socrates, like many of his fellow philosophers, refrained from writing altogether on the basis that it would affect his memory, end quote. Thomas, are we just scared of the things we don't know? I mean, our ancestors have gone through similar revolutions, or are they different this time?
So look, I think obviously nobody has data on the future, and it might be that this really is the final leap or step before singularity, and especially when Mr. Elon Musk implants Neuralink in our brains, we become one with machines, and then there's all sorts of consequences. We don't know that. What we do know is that we as a species have always evolved through technology, and that AI is just another technological invention, much like fire, the wheel, electricity, the internet, the smartphone. And yes, you go back to the time of Socrates and his fellow philosophers, and writing was the equivalent of ChatGPT. It was, controversial, polemical, scary, and they sort of, famously they refrained from writing anything down. So much that Socrates is actually the original footnote to Plato, right? We don't even know if he existed or Plato made him up. So, I think that an overreaction is probably better than an underreaction. But I also think that, at the moment, there's very little nuance, rational, and moderate discussions on the pros and cons that technology can bring. It's either very apocalyptic, cover of Time magazine, the end of humanity with AI highlighted, and so on, or it's, irrationally optimistic, especially if it's big tech telling us that we shouldn't worry, everything is going to be taken care of, and our lives will become much more fulfilling, better, creative, because our co-pilot will do all the work for us. I think the reality is probably more in the middle. And with that, well, what I do in iHuman, what I do in my latest book is to try to analyze the adverse impact that AI has had on us so far, under the assumption that if it makes us uncomfortable enough, we have an incentive to actually change certain things, right? The fact that it has made us a little bit more biased, more impulsive, less creative, more boring. So if we don't like it, we have the ability to reinvent ourselves. I mean, that comes with being very adaptable as a species.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk more about the book now itself. I want to get into some of the nitty-gritty of some of the things you can promise your readers. You touch on popular content in the book. You mentioned Netflix's Social Dilemma, which I mentioned briefly at the start of our conversation. Surveillance Capitalism, a very famous book. I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but I know it's cited everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the TV show Black Mirror, which is kind of the modern day twilight zone of our times. What can readers learn from iHuman? What are some of the things that the readers can come away from?
So hopefully they will learn a little bit about AI, especially if they don't have technical background on it. It's designed for people with no knowledge to really understand what AI is and what AI is not, and really to understand in pretty much, I would say some level of detail how the algorithms that we interact with on a regular basis are reshaping our behavior, right? So culture is always a big influence on how we behave. The average person today behaves different from the average person in the Renaissance or in medieval times or in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, even though our hardware or DNA is the same. It hasn't changed, right? So what I argue is that the current culture could be defined universally as the AI age. And with that comes certain behavioral traits and markers, which they will discover in the book. And then the final part really is a call to action, how we need to change if we want to ensure that the AI age is also the human AI age, and that we use this technological invention to upgrade ourselves. If you think about it, discussions as to whether AI is smarter or not than humans are flawed by definition because AI is a human invention. So if we conclude that artificial intelligence is remarkably smart, that speaks a lot about our own inventiveness and our own intelligence because we created it. So the question really that I tried to explore is how we can become smarter with AI, interacting with it and mitigating the negative effects and really leveraging the benefits. And, it finishes on a relatively optimistic note with a call to action to rediscover some of the qualities that make us who we are, and that AI will probably not harness things like deep curiosity, creativity, self-awareness, empathy, and emotional intelligence. The argument is that AI will probably win the IQ battle, but the EQ battle could be won by humans.
Okay, fantastic. Thomas, thank you so much. I know that I picked up my copy yesterday. It's currently in the mail. And final question, iHuman, AI, automation, and the quest to reclaim what makes us unique. Where can we get it?
Amazon probably, and then whatever bookstore people have nearby. But definitely Amazon. And then if you're in the US, places like Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, other local bookstores. Wherever you are, if you're in London, Tel Aviv, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, you can also go to your hipster bookstore if you prefer, to resist globalization. And of course, many airports also hold a copy. So I hope you enjoyed, James, and I hope your listeners have gotten something out of this as well.
All right, Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, thank you so much, author of iHuman. Thank you so much for taking the time and for the chat.
My pleasure.